Pirkei Avot, second parak, Mishnah 2. So it starts like this. Rabban Gamliel, b'noshel Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Omer. Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who was the author of the previous Mishnah, right, more commonly known as Rabbi, Omer, says as follows. Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz, she'giet shnehem mashkachat avon. Beautiful is learning Torah with derech eretz, worldly occupation, because the toil of both of them causes sin to be forgotten. V'chol Torah shein ima malacha, sofa betela, megoreret avon. And any Torah that is not accompanied with work, at the end will be batal, cancelled, neglected, and will drag in sin. V'chol ha'oskim im hatzibur, yu oskim imayim l'shem shamayim. And anyone who deals with the public should deal with them l'shem shamayim, for a heavenly noble cause, a heavenly cause, l'shem shamayim. Shneschut avotam esayatam, because the merit of their forefathers helps them. V'tzidkatam umedet la'ad, and the righteousness stands forever. V'atem achmale ani alechem sachar harbe kilu asitem. And you, I will grant it to you much schar as if you had done it. Okay, so there's a lot to comment on. We will definitely be splitting this Mishnah up into a few parts, and I want to discuss the beginning of this Mishnah and some questions the Maharal has on it in his work Derech Chaim. So we go Rabban Gamliel b'noshel Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi Omer. Okay, fine. So that's an introduction, which we'll discuss in a couple of minutes. Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz. Beautiful is Torah, learning Torah, with worldly occupation. Now, that's interesting. We'll discuss two questions that the Maharal asks, and one of them is on this. When we have A with B, usually A is secondary and B is primary. Now, if that's true, then that means Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz, Talmud Torah is secondary and derech eretz is primary. Right? A with B, B is primary. Talmud Torah im derech eretz. That bothers the Maharal. He's like, I do not understand. If the Mishnah wanted to articulate an idea, they should have said Yafet Talmud Torah kasher ima derech eretz or something like that. Not A im B, because that seems to connote the importance on to derech eretz, which is very difficult to understand. That's the first question. And second, when it says she'giet shnehem mashakachat avon, the toil in both of them causes sin to be forgotten. But if it's about the toil, then why do you need both? Why can't you just do derech eretz, just worldly occupation, have a job, work hard, and you're good? Or learning. I mean, what could be better than that? Learn all day long, get up early in the morning, stay up late into the night, don't do much else, just learn Torah, and mashkachat avon. Sin will be forgotten. But that's not the way that the Mishnah articulates itself. So what is it? Is it about the toil, or is it about the things that you are doing? The kind of the dual nature of what we are doing. Those are the two questions that we will look to answer. So in answering the first one, it is important to realize that this topic has obviously been discussed elsewhere. And Rabbi Aharon Lichtenstein, in his book, it's called By His Light, and it's effectively a compilation of a number of Rav Aharon Lichtenstein's Zecher Tzaddik Livracha's addresses, and he says like this. This is actually a dispute among Rishonim, at the very least. Namely, the principle of A with B, right, Talmud Torah im derech eretz, or something else, which one is primary? Rabbeinu Tam, who is one of the greatest Balei Tosfot, and is Rashi's grandson, says like the Maharal's pshat, right? A im B means A is secondary and B is primary. A is secondary to B. But Rabbeinu Elchanan, who is the grandnephew of Rabbeinu Tam actually, and is the son of the Ri, who's also one of the famous Balei Tosfot, says no. A with B means A is primary, not B. So if it's Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz, no problem, because Talmud Torah is primary and derech eretz is secondary. And this, of course, appears multiple times in Shas, in the Talmud, as at least one example provided by Rav Aharon Lichtenstein is, it says, Yom Kippur atones with tshuva. Now, Lefi Rabbeinu Tam, Yom Kippur with tshuva is B, tshuva is primary. And Tshuva is the most important thing. A with B is the most important. So Yom Kippur with Tshuva is key. But Lafi Rabbeinu Elchanan, he says no, Yom Kippur is primary. That's like the main atoner, if you will. Now, what that means for Rabbeinu Tam is when he's learning this and it says Yafet Talmud Torim Derech Eretz, Rabbeinu Tam holds that in that case Derech Eretz, right, is B, and therefore that's Iker, right? That's the primary. But it is important to realize that Rabbeinu Tam is the one who's saying that. And it's very difficult to understand or believe that Rabbeinu Tam would say, oh, yeah, a job and Torah, the job is more important. The job is primary, Torah is secondary. That is inconceivable. It's too much. So what does that mean? So Aharon Lichtenstein, who is the one who asked these questions, says, no. When we say something is Iker, what does that mean? Does that mean qualitative or does it mean quantitative? So Aharon Lichtenstein says it's actually quantitative. When we say something is Iker, it means how many hours do you put into it. So for example, someone sleeps 6 hours a day and they pray 2 hours a day, right? Is sleep 3 times more important than prayer? Or again, let's say you're sleeping 6 hours a day and you have 1 hour with your kids. Is sleeping 6 times more important than the time you spend with your kids? That's very difficult to believe that a person would say something like that. No. It's just saying, yes, I spend a very substantial amount of my day sleeping, but it doesn't mean it's because it's more important than other things that I do. That's not the way it works. So with this, it actually flows very well. Yafet Talmud Torah Derech Eretz, Talmud Torah, A with B is primary, Derech Eretz. What does primary mean? It's just where I spend most of my time. I spend more time working than I do learning, and Rabbeinu Tam would say that's normal. That's okay. You could still be an amazing person with that. You could still be a beautiful Ben Torah, a Torah Jew, learning, making real progress in our personal growth. That is fine. And it's important to note that Rabbeinu Elchanan would disagree. And in fact, Rambam, we know Paskins, and no, if it says Talmud Torah im derech eretz, it means Talmud Torah is primary, right? A with B, the Torah is primary, and Rabbeinu Elchanan would say, if Talmud Torah is primary, you should be spending most of your time learning, not working. And that is how Rambam paskins. He says a person should work 3 hours and learn 9 hours a day. That's the way it should work. Right? We're not saying don't work. You should work. You should earn a living, but you don't need to spend so much of your time doing it. You certainly don't have to spend, or should not spend, a majority of your time doing it. So fine. So now, this actually reflects back into the Maharal. Namely, you say, Rabban Gamliel b'no shel Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi Omer. Now the Maharal says, it's certainly true. There's no question that it's true that we, as the Mishnahs in Pirkei Avot progress, right, it's going from older generations to the more recent generations. And so similarly, obviously, Rabban Gamliel is the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is Rabbi, and he's the one who taught the second parak, Mishnah Aleph. Now, if we go back to that just very briefly, just seeing what it says, just to remind ourselves, it says, Ezohi derech yeshara sheyavar lo ha'adam, Kol shi tifer lo oseh v'tifer lina adam. V'vizahir b'mitzvah kal k'v'chamura, she'en ata yodea matan tzchar shel mitzvot, v'mechashev hefsed mitzvah k'neged tzcharo, u'tzchar avera k'neged hefseda. Right, so it's talking about our relationship with mitzvahs. It says in the Maharal, while it's true, the Maharal takes a slightly different tack. When he says Yafet Talmud Torim Derech Eretz, that Derech Eretz is primary, right, that seems to be the Iker, the way the Maharal understands it is Derech Eretz just comes first, right? Like you need to work. Once you work, once you have a parnas, once you're able to support yourself, then learn Torah and go towards more noble pursuits. And so similarly, but or rather, on an ideological level, Maharal says the reason we taught Rabbi first isn't only because he is the father of Rabban Gamliel, who's the author of our Mishnah. It's also as ideologically, what Rabbi is teaching is more important and has higher value. That is to say, Rabbi is teaching us about mitzvahs. That comes before Derech Eretz. In our ideological scheme of things, in our ideological ladder, mitzvahs trump work. And that's why Rabbi was taught before Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel is practical. You do need to work. That being said, being practical doesn't effectively neutralize all ideological motivation and inspiration. And just to quote the way the Maharal puts it, he says like this, right, and therefore the son comes after him, לתת מוסר לאדם בדרך ארץ, שהוא הנהגת העולם, שם הכנה אל ההצלחה, right, and therefore the son comes afterwards to give people musar, right, to let's help them straighten their vision with derech eretz, which is the way of the world, which is a preparation towards hatzlacha. That's a preparation towards success. What success? It's the mitzvahs. It's heaven, like in terms of direct avoda instead of indirect avoda. Working is very important, but it's indirect. It's not the same thing as doing a mitzvah. So that's that. And now that's question 1. So what's question 2? Or question 2 was, remember, it said, right? Toiling in both of them causes sin to be forgotten. So what does that mean? It says the Maharal that that's because there are two parts to a person, right? There's a person's guf, a person's body, which needs to be taken care of, and his soul. Now what happens is, in order for a person or when a person is working on both of these, through working and through learning, then he's working on both parts of himself. When he's striving for that, then he's striving towards completion. When a person is striving towards that shleimut, right, in such a case, there's no room for sin, right? There's no lacking. The person's not lacking in terms of there's still room for growth, but he's striving ever upwards, ever forwards. He's moving in positive directions in a way that integrates his entire essence, because he's got the work, he's got the learning, he's got the spiritual, he's got the physical, he's taking care of everything, and he's moving forward. Whereas if we're just working, then your spiritual self is not being fulfilled. It's not being put to use. It's just kind of being neglected, or it is being neglected, and as a result, you're not going to see meshkachet avon, right? There is a chisaron there. There is a lacking there, and wherever there's a lack, it's goreret avon. It drags in sin with it, right? It effectively pulls it along as the natural part. Where there's emptiness, right? The way you can make sure that structurally, the way to make sure that a structure is sound is to make sure to fill it up. Where there are gaps, where there are holes, you can easily break it. Whereas if it's completely full, then you're good, right? The structure is more stronger, it's more stable. And similarly with a person who is neglecting his spiritual self because he's working all the time is literally just leaving himself open to sin. And it's similar with a person who's only learning. A person who's only learning is neglecting his physical self. There's part of him that's not being fulfilled, that's not being activated. And as a result, there's a lack, and therefore it's goreret avon. There's going to be sin that's being dragged in here. And just to end with this amazing quote, the Maharal is so serious about this work that he's saying it's not even about the money. It's not about the money is obviously an important element. I mean, a person doesn't want to work for free, but in terms of, let's just say a person's wealthy, right? He has a lot of money. He doesn't need to work. Should he? Says the Maharal. Afilu im yesh mamon harbe, ve'eno chaser, im ein osek b'ashlamat atzmo, eno mashkach mimena ha'avon, ve'zeu shetole b'yad shnehem. To translate that, even if he has a lot of money and he's not lacking, if he's not osek, if he's not dealing with the completion of himself, sin will not be forgotten from him. And that's why it says it's about the yigi in both of them. It's not just a practical issue. Look, the person needs to work. What if he doesn't need to work? He should still work, because it's not about the money, it's about completing up oneself, and in completing oneself, a person has to put himself to work. Those are the ideas. We'll see you next time.